Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics Monday on the IBM TV network.
Morning.
We do have a very exciting show to go over today, especially the latest developments, especially on the massive spending bill that we have. We want to hear your input. Um, Also, we have Dan Worthington from South Dakota, where the Pandora's box has just been sent out or exposed or something like that. I'm not really sure. You probably know more about that than I do. Um, Apparently on TV, there's this big deal that people from overseas are hiding money in South Dakota and Nevada because of their anti-exposure to who they are laws. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Dan?
Oh, sure, but they're not hiding it. I mean, it's in plain sight, right? It's fully reportable. So how is anyone hiding any money? Maybe Nevada, but not in South Dakota.
You know, the thing is, mainstream media just puts things out in 2 seconds. You absorb it, and then they go away. And what they did is they put out that for some reason nefarious things are being done in South Dakota and Nevada of foreign people hiding money in those states, and then they disappear, you know, without explaining anything about that. Now, to give you an idea, when we're talking about what
they did say that it was about tax avoidance and that people owed taxes of various kinds on this money, and that's why the shelters were created.
right.
That's what I read today. It's new,
Yeah, right. In other words, they're starting to say there's some tax avoidance and there's some shenanigans going on in your state, South Dakota, Dan, and Nevada. But they said the Americans weren't involved. They're usually foreign people that put their money over there, and that's bad. Fill in the blank why. Now, John, since you're in North Dakota, you're pretty close to South Dakota. Do you see any of these shenanigans in your state?
Oh, from time to time, sure. But also remember, tax avoidance is not illegal, only tax evasion.
That's right.
You know, there's lots of things we do to avoid tax that are perfectly legal. Some things the IRS may not like, and they can challenge. But you know, that's what people sometimes forget is tax avoidance is, as long as it's done legally, is fine.
Right. And part of it is they build into the Internal Revenue Code incentives so that money flows a certain direction, like the opportunity zones, for example. You know, they're actually built into the code so that money flows into zones in the United States to provide opportunities for individuals. Child care credit, that's another thing. It's built into the Internal Revenue Code. It's considered, like you said, tax avoidance. It's not tax evasion. Yes, Dan.
Right.
Well, you got to remember that there are international laws in place. CRS in the United States, FATCA, there are all kinds of reporting requirements that most of these legitimate trust companies are required to follow and have spent millions of dollars in compliance to make sure that happens. And so, you know, I agree 100%. You know, these tax avoidance, in fact, is a duty of taxpayers to not pay any more tax than they're legally required to do, as one justice of the Supreme Court said long ago. So I think nefarious is hardly a word to describe it. You know, sophisticated planning probably describes it better. There are tax treaties between the various countries around the world, and reporting requirements that are required to be reported in a stringent way. So, you know, I think the media is just doing what it does, right?
No, I have to say something.
Democrats. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, look, this is a news story, so we have to see, you know, is it real? You know, is it being reported correctly? You know, maybe it is exaggerated on one side, but I just pulled up ABC News, you know, which I generally don't trust, actually. But
I wonder why.
yeah, I mean, it's not my primary news source for sure. It's very liberal oriented. But that said, they use the words of tax evasion. They say many of these, first of all, it was 330 current and former politicians, including Jordan's King Abdullah, the Czech prime minister, Ecuador's president, and Putin. is in there too.
Oh,
And
Putin invest in South Dakota. That's great.
But here's the
I
thing.
don't know. It could be
You know,
Nevada.
so the question. Okay, and it also says that it's a many of the accounts were designed to evade taxes and conceal assets for other shady reasons, according to the report. So, I mean, it's too early to tell, but look, people don't create these things for, okay, I'm going to pay my taxes and I have nothing to hide. Generally, there's something going on here, and it could be, avoiding local taxes, could be burying money because they don't want people to know about it, but I would guess a lot of these accounts will turn out to be include some negative aspects. Let me put it that way. We'll see what the stories are.
Let me just say, Nick's beloved Democrats, but Republicans do it as well. But Nick's beloved Democrats, they create tax incentives, is what they call them, in order to provide opportunity zones or this or that and the other.
Right.
They don't provide those tax incentives to the poor; they provide them to the rich. And then when you use them,
that's because poor don't pay taxes. We went over that before.
Right. So then when the rich use them in the way they were designed, they go, oh, the rich, see, they just lower their taxes, they're avoiding taxes, they're doing all these things. Of course you're going to avoid taxes. What are you going to do? Voluntarily offer more? Like, oh, I can actually reduce legally my taxes? No, I want to give more for you to piss up against the wall.
Well, South Dakota is not Republican, Democrat, first of all, and I don't remember the other state, but they're not.
I was referring to the opportunity zones and just tax loopholes in general.
Well, the opportunity zones are another whole.
They're nationwide
to stimulate the economy, and that's real and legitimate. But what we're talking about, basically, we're talking about Cayman Island types accounts where they're hiding money. Or previously in Switzerland, in certain countries,
they're hiding it in South Dakota, $360 billion, according to.
Now, let me just address. Some
of that money doesn't belong there.
some of it, no, but some of it is there, not just because people are trying to avoid taxes, because you can't repatriate it without paying taxes on it unless you borrow the money against assets you have in those locations. Some of it is because regulations prevent you from making certain investments. Some of it is because you want asset protection. You want to have separate legal vehicles owning separate assets. There's a whole heap of reasons that wealthy people do this. And the thing is that Bernie Sanders himself has said when he was on one of the debate stages and they were talking about 70 and 80% tax rates. And he said, yeah, but it doesn't really matter if we go that high. It's really just the effective rate that we're worried about. And we know that wealthy people use all these loopholes. Well, another way of restating that in my mind is if I don't use the loopholes, if I don't use these legal offshore structures, then I'm going to end up paying a significantly higher tax rate than what the government envisaged. So if the government, both Democrats and Republicans in America and the two parties in every other country, if they can't come up with a fair and reasonable tax system that treats everybody in a particular economic position pretty equally, if they can't do that because of their own partisan politics, don't blame the wealthy for wanting to legally avoid taxes. What else are they supposed to do?
Yeah, and Bernie is right. We need to bring the tax rates up to about 90%. And the reason why is that's Darwinian. In other words, the dumb people will pay the tax. The good people will seek shelters and work with the tax attorneys and accountants to make sure their taxes are reduced. So a 90% tax rate actually does make a lot of sense, I think.
Any good Democrat, Nick, whatever will hurt the poor the most,
it works.
Whatever will hurt the poor the most and working families the most.
I would not say that that's going to hurt the poor. It's the old Eisenhower 90% tax rate that we used to have. For people that earn more than $1 million, it made Ronald Reagan mad too bad.
Just remind me, every time the tax rates decreased, the economy boomed. Did we talk about Reagan?
It boomed. No, it boomed after
obviously,
Eisenhower.
Nick is kidding
90%, baby.
Obviously,
why are we kidding about 90% tax rate? What's wrong with that?
Obviously, first of all,
we're making over $1 million.
This incents people to work. Second of all,
what do you mean? They're making over $1 million bucks.
The government actually collects more when they lower taxes than raise taxes because people, they do start hiding money, but also they have a disincentive to work, to produce. I mean, every major tax cut, Kennedy tax cut, the Reagan tax cut, And another one, I got the third one now, but it historically resulted in 2 years later more revenue for the government than than not only predicted, but it increased revenue significantly. So
But that's what they'd like you to believe. But I actually did a study on it, Peter, and the marginal rates when they were 40% were actually the most optimal for the stock market and for the economy. So there is actually an optimal number, at least
I
historically.
think they could raise the taxes a little bit on the wealthy. I'm not opposed to that. A little bit,
Yeah.
absolutely. And they should close some of the shelters, like South Dakota.
South Dakota.
Oh,
Yeah,
wait a second. Okay, so listen, I happen to know the people in South Dakota, especially the South Dakota Trust Company, and they are the gold standard. And they have KYC procedures in place. First of all, they wouldn't be taking any nefarious accounts anyway, because they don't do that. The Back in the day, Citibank got their hands slapped by the Office of the Comptroller because they took some accounts from the president of Mexico and his brother, and that created all kinds of problems. And so these stringent KYC standards are in place. I know South Dakota Trust Company has chosen to follow those. So while it represents many of the Fortune 500 wealth, Fortune 300 wealth in the country, they steer clear and do not accept quote unquote nefarious accounts. Stay away from anything that looks like tainted money of any kind because of the concern for this various accounts. Stay away from anything that looks like tainted money.
by the way, KYC means know your customer. For those people listening who don't know what a KYC account is. Somebody has feedback. By the way, KYC.
Something's wrong with them.
Okay, she had some feedback.
And they also have significant AML rules in most countries in the world, which is anti-money laundering.
Yep.
So, this sort of idea that there's caches of dark money. Look, there is some. Let's be realistic. Of course, there is some, but I don't think that the wealthy business owner who's making $1.5 million a year is somehow trying to, nobody wants to look over their shoulder. I mean, I've worked in this field. Most people say legally reduce my taxes as low as they possibly can, but I want to know that if I get audited by the tax department, I can just go here, speak to my lawyers, speak to my accountants, go for it. That's what most people want. Nobody wants to know that they could be faced with significant penalties.
Look, 360 people don't put billions and billions and billions of dollars into an account for no reason. In other words, why did they do this? And when you read the details of some of the articles, I'll just read you one. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We'll see why people did it. But it's not like, there's a magic thing about South Dakota, trust that it's going to avoid taxes. It says in 2009, the Czech prime minister put $22 million into shell companies to buy a chateau property. And it says the shell property and the shell company and chateau was not disclosed in required asset declarations, according to documents. So that's just an example of, what people are doing this to either hide money or avoid taxes. There's some reason why. Why wouldn't I just keep it in my local, investment? Why not just put it at TD Ameritrade if I'm in the U.S. or whatever? I'm just saying there's a million places for Putin to put money. There's a million places for all these people to put money. And many of them have some of them have previous histories, like actors and stuff, of putting money in and then being caught. Like, oops.
So, I just love
certainly if somebody's willing to commit fraud, there's not much you can do to stop them.
I just love the idea that there's people in South Dakota that are sort of walking around going, I started up my local coffee shop with Vladimir Putin's money.
Wait, so Vladimir Putin has his personal money in South Dakota? Is that the
That's what
story?
It just said in the ABC story that he's one of the 360 people. Right. Look, if I'm in another country and I want to put some money in my, nest egg kind of account, let's put some money here, let's put some money there, but I'm not necessarily disclosing it, whatever. Let's say you're in I think it was Ecuador. I mean, you're president of Ecuador. You're saying, well, maybe there will be a revolution, whatever down the road.
I love
I
it.
better put some money away and hide it. Now, I'm not going to declare taxes on it, probably. But there also could be, it's 360 different stories. That's the bottom line. Every
Peter.
story will be a different story. Some might be, I just legitimately thought, it was a good, safe place to keep my money, and I'm sure they were getting a lot of interest. I'm joking.
Peter,
But,
tell me, what do you think about Salvador and buying bitcoins, which is a legal currency of Salvador now? Do you think your money would be saved there?
Yeah, I love Bitcoin.
You love bitcoins, of course.
You're not.
You know that.
I'm just waiting for the U.S. government to come out with their rules now, where you have to pay tax on crypto, and you have to report every disclosure if they ever get the infrastructure bill done.
Okay, I want to swing over to this thing
You're
that
muted, Jim. You're muted.
oh, wait.
I think they already did that in North Carolina. If I looked at the paperwork recently, you have to report your cryptocurrency transactions. So,
And there's the state.
Yeah. So when I sell my Bitcoin, I got to report
I wouldn't do business in North Carolina. I tell everyone I meet. This guy here was telling me about his new invention, and he said, "Yeah, I incorporated in North Carolina." I go, "Stop right there. Go somewhere else." But each state has its advantages and disadvantages. I think that complicates the situation. I think we just need to get to a very simpler tax program. Everything is written by attorneys and designed to provide them sustainability. I mean, you get in trouble with a tax law because you took a deduction you were told was legal, and then 10, 15, 20 years later, they go, "Oh, no, that wasn't. And we're going to go back." And no, it just needs to be made simple. We need to cut it here, start all over, because we're kind of rebooting from COVID. And I can't wait to see the mess we created with all the COVID stuff we did.
Yeah,
I mean, forgiving some loans and not forgiving others. And I mean, who gets that benefit and who doesn't and why? I mean,
this is what I don't understand about what's going on with the whole Build Back Better. It's all about let's put money into whatever things we think will stimulate the economy. But there's no talk, as usual. There's no talk about things that are known to be holding America back in a lot of ways, which is the complications in not just the tax code, but in regulations, laws, the book of codes, all that sort of stuff. I mean, nobody can make sense of this. I mean, just the tax law itself federally is 70,000 pages. Why would you need 70,000 pages of tax law? Taxes shouldn't be that complex and complicated.
Lawyer job security, Jack. Lawyer job security, right, Nick?
Exactly. And then you go through,
I won't comment at this point in
regulations, then you go through all the laws, and it's important to know whether or not you're actually committing a crime or not. It's just impossible. So, if you want to actually build a better country, having legislative efficiency might be a good place to start. But based on what's happening at the moment with the debt ceiling, which has caused the treasury market to bounce all over the place, now we're actually seeing, headline interest rates effectively are going to go up because of the depression in the prices of US treasuries. This puts more pressure on the US taxpayer to pay back the debt and the interest that they're going to pay on the debt that's on the books. I mean, this is just a travesty, and this sort of political gamemanship and these aggressive sort of deadlock type positions, and we won't negotiate. We're not going to budge. This is holding America back really severely, and I think that politicians on both sides of the aisle really need to come back to the idea of actually representing the interests of the people they are supposed to be representatives of.
Well, Shaquille, you just mentioned something about paying back the debt. Well, here's the history of the United States. But the world, by the way, are not angels either. They have very similar problems. So as we tend to focus on the U.S., but in the history of the United States, basically in the last, 200, 150, 200 years of looking at the national debt, we've never paid down the national debt. The best ever done was Clinton. During those years, not counting off the fund books liabilities, he broke even, or he had a surplus in the budget, but he didn't pay down any debt. And here's the magic thing. This is amazing. Anybody can see this. This is the U.S. debt clock. And I don't know, and if you just go to usdebtclock.org, So 3 years ago, just 3 years ago, it was around 21 million. I heard a politician say that today, and I think that sounds about right. Right now, it's 28 million. It went from 21 to 28 in 3 years. Well, and since we never pay it down, this and there's mainly 2 points. If you just look at this, it says assets per citizen 597,000, liability per citizen 473,000. So basically, they're saying there's barely more assets per citizen than the debt we owe already. But here's the problem. Again, I've always emphasized this. It says the debt is 28.8 trillion, but it's probably 100, 150, 200 trillion, because the United States, like every country in the world that I've looked at, and I've looked at many, many countries on many states, have said that, there it is right there, growing by the minute. All these countries have promised free healthcare, and nobody's paid for it in advance. So, and that could be 100 or 200 trillion on top of this. So, effectively, there's going to be so much impact of this in terms of the future, and wasting money, of course, like 3.5 or 5 trillion, and creating more programs that'll hurt the economy is the opposite of what we should do, obviously, too.
Well, Peter, you bring up a valid point. Under Clinton, the budget was balanced. I think that should be a primary goal of governments. They shouldn't just think that they can keep indebting the country further and borrowing money for an endless array of social programs. They should rank things in priority and say, okay, right now it's really important to build bridges and roads. It's not so important to focus on, on some other thing, healthcare, whatever it is. Let the politicians argue about where they're going to spend the money, but it shouldn't be an absolute free-for-all.
You know what? You're right, Shaquille. And you know what? It would have been a perfect comment in 1970 when they could have done this.
Well,
and when people started discussing what was going on. But the whole world, politicians do what politicians do. They're not interested in numbers and business, and they look very short term. But in 1970, maybe they could have changed things. But people wouldn't have liked it either, and so then the politicians don't get elected. How do you go back now? Because you have to say, okay, we're going to make the retirement age 95. The debt is so huge.
In recent decades, we've seen Republicans spend a lot of money. They do. They always have a go at Democrats for doing that. But Democrats tend to spend the money on social services, but Republicans are pretty quick to give subsidies to farmers.
Oh, yeah.
You still have this issue with Iowa at the moment. This is where a lot of high fructose corn syrup comes from, and that was done under Nixon. And who wants to take on Iowa? It's the first presidential caucus, so you lose Iowa, you're probably not going to be the president. If you ask John McCain about that one, if he was still alive. So the politics at play can be quite complicated, and it's both sides' fault. But certainly balancing the budget's important. But what really concerns me about the United States, debt levels, comparative to GDP, you're right, around the world is quite a problem. But it's also the percentage of debt versus the total asset base of the country. And I think that's becoming a real problem if you look at the debt clock as well, and compare, say, the United States to some other countries that are smaller but have a similar economy, just a smaller one like Australia does. That's a real issue. The unfunded liabilities that really concerns me. And I think it's giving jitters to the market. If you come this close to a debt default, I don't think that'll happen. But if you come this close to it, people are going to start questioning, is US debt really risk-free? If you've got, let's call it 200 billion, and that all comes on the books in the next 10, 15 years, if that happens and the United States has an increase in its interest rates of just 1% from where it is right now, that's an extra $2 trillion on top of already $3 trillion deficits. I can't see how that's sustainable. Something is going to have to give.
Which is why interest rates will be going down or not going up, because the government can control interest rates. They're all over the world. They'll have to do that. And by buying their own debt, and basically in the end, it's an indirect way of printing money. And then you get inflation, especially in commodities. As an interesting point, China, over the last week or so, closed down a lot of their manufacturing because the utilities were short on energy. So, it's going to come out somewhere. It's going to come out in housing prices. It's going to come out in commodities, in energy, for sure, maybe gold and silver. There has to be huge impacts. If you play Monopoly and you go get $1,000 every time you go around the board, it has big impacts on.
Peter, if I could just say, though, I understand where you're coming from, that the governments are going to want to keep interest rates low. But like, if you have a look at the position that Jerome Powell is in at the moment, is what does he do? You've got high rates of inflation. What does he do? Keep interest rates low? I mean, he can't do that. He has to offload some stuff off his books as well. So this puts him in a difficult position. And the real difficulty is governments can only artificially keep something low for so long because no government is bigger than the market itself. And historically, what we have seen is that when countries start to have high rates of inflation and stagflation in the economy, and what you also see is upward pressure by the market on interest rates, but the government comes in and tries to keep them artificially low, something breaks. And when something breaks, you end up with rampant inflation.
And this is the question I wrestle with all the time, because we have our show on Wednesdays in Modern Investing with Sasha, where we talk about where to put your money. So look, right now, today even, I just sold a bunch of assets because they'd gone up. I made a nice profit, and but where does the investor put his money? Because let's say the U.S. government continue and other governments. I mean, keep in mind, other governments have their rates. A lot of them are paying negative yield. So let's say the U.S. keeps it low or even brings it down to zero eventually. And they do that by saying any treasury rate over X dollars, like they did recently, over, let's say 2%, whatever, they're going to buy themselves. And by the way, they did this for 11 years in World War II. During World War II, the U.S. government said exactly that. We're going to buy every asset. So the market goes, or as an investor, because we're the ones who have the money, whether you're a pension investor, a mutual fund investor. So then you say, okay, now I have this chunk of money which I worked for all my life, because a lot of the money is in retirees, or I'm a pension manager, or whatever it is. I have a lot of money to invest. Now, the U.S. government is saying, let's say they say, we'll only give you 0.5%. So where do I put my money? Do I sit it in a bank, or do I buy it in the stock market? Which is why the market will continue to go up for a while if they bring rates down. But at some point, let's say the market has gone up because interest rates are now very low and flat. Now, where am I going to put my money? I mean, it's like, I'll take my 0.5%. You have an idea? Because I'd like to know.
Well, so I'm curious. I've heard and read about being able to trade using your IRA or your Roth IRA. And I guess the money, the way I understand it, goes back into the IRA, and you avoid paying taxes. What do you know about being able to do that, and also being able to use your 401k to, say, potentially buy real estate and take that investment and keep turning it over? How does that work?
Well, that's okay. That's the tax aspects. I do have a bit of a tax background, but again, everybody should consult with their accountant. But basically, it is sheltered if you buy it in a Roth IRA or an IRA. And by the way, you can own real estate in an IRA too, but there are complications to that because you have to do what's called minimum distributions on IRAs and 401ks. I'm not even sure you could own real estate in 401k, but you could always roll it to an IRA if you get access to the money. But then you have to do minimum distribution. So that complicates it because now eventually you have to sell that house and eventually you have to pay tax on it. The Roth is a beautiful thing. There's a Roth 401k, which is an amazing aspect. And there's other ways to, convert your IRAs to Roth. But in the end, you can trade in it tax-free, but you always have to pay taxes down the road.
Right. Would you have to
it's all
your Roth?
all possible.
I mean,
It's
how
all
messy
possible,
is that
but-
with the Roth if you're investing with your Roth?
Yeah, the Roth is amazing investment because you now you have to can leave it to your beneficiaries for 10 years so they can spread it out over your lifetime. Plus that, I think everybody should have some Roth assets if you have assets, if you can build them up, and then you could also have regular assets. As a matter of fact, those people with high incomes can do what's called a backdoor IRA, and so what you do is you contribute to the IRA. And then you convert it to a Roth right away, and you really don't pay tax on that because you just put it in, so your after-tax basis is the same. So it's a way for people to build up their Roths a little bit, or a Roth 401k is amazing for the self-employed.
Are you limited then with the Roth?
Closed, by the way.
I'm sorry, are you limited?
What was that, Nick?
Oh, I was just going to take a quick commercial break, then we'll be right back.
Okay. There we go. Don't forget to watch Investing with Sasha on Wednesdays. It's very good information on how to learn how to not be afraid to invest your money. Just get out there and do it. Until you do it, you don't know what you're missing out on. I mean, it can be a lot of fun. I actually have family members and friends now who are saying, I didn't know I could do this until I watched Sasha's show. So give it a shot. And if you've never done it before, watch Investing with Sasha on Wednesdays. All right, guys, let's talk about this a little bit because, wow, what a way to invest money without having a huge mountain of tax liability through a Roth IRA. And I didn't, I'm sorry, I'm not that educated. A Roth 401k? All right, let's talk about that.
I think Kim and I'm obviously not American, so Peter and the others will be able to answer better than me. But Roth IRAs, as I understand it from back when I did a university course back in the day on the differences in tax codes, is that a Roth IRA, you invest your post-tax dollars into the IRA, so therefore your investments grow tax-free. Whereas with just a normal IRA, it's pre-tax money, so you will have to pay tax on it when you pull it out. Is that a fairly good?
Yeah, that's correct. That's
okay.
Correct.
So if you take that and you're investing and making it bigger and turning it over, then that's interesting to me. I mean, are there limitations or restrictions to how much you can put in and invest?
Well, there have been proposals, but they're really high. I think there was a proposal maybe that if you have more than $10 million in a Roth, they may want to cap it there. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if down the road they may do that. But in the end, the government, they'll get it at those accounts out because now it used to be you could leave it to your beneficiaries for life, but they changed the law.
More than 10 million that you've put in, or more than 10 million after the assets?
I believe they either is a law now, or they're talking about potentially saying if you have 10 million assets, that'll be a cap.
That's right.
So if I put $1 million into a wonderful company like Tesla and it went from $2 to $700,000 million, then all of a sudden I'm going to hit my limit. Is that the deal?
Yeah,
it's in the House Ways and Means
Dan,
Committee.
do you know about that?
This is all in the House Ways and Means Committee a proposal limit of $10 million in the IRA accounts. The other thing is back to a Roth IRA. They're shutting that down as well in the new proposals. We don't know what will come out finally between all the political haggling, but both of those proposals are in the tax legislation, along with reduction of the estate tax exemption in half. And they didn't do away with the step up in basis, which is ironic. And I didn't see where they had that quirky capital gain rule upon death where they put that in either. So, but they're shutting down intentionally defective grant or trusts and the rules around those and allowing those to have your cake and eat it too. Much of that is centered around most of these domestic asset protection trust jurisdictions and others, of which there are 33, by the way. It's not just South Dakota. By the way, the culprit was Trident Trust Company. I just copied an article in the reading about the one that was dealing with the oligarchs and that kind of thing. So this is an international game that some of the trust companies play. But like I said, the new CRS regulations that came out a few years ago and the FATCA rules in the United States, and especially after the Panama Papers, has really curtailed much of this. However, people will continue to try. So that's probably what we're looking at now is much of the and it's become a political football, obviously, because of the need for the IRS to try to shut things down, to do things, collect more money. But these are foreign nationals, and they're subject to foreign tax. They may be subject to U.S. tax, depending on how it's structured. We don't know. We have enough particulars. Now, the $380 billion number in South Dakota includes all deposits, not just the quote-unquote nefarious ones, if you read the article closely. And so it's that 380 billion wasn't transferred. King Abdul evidently did set up something, but it's to own homes and that stuff in the United States. They say that they fully disclosed all that. I don't know. We have to go and do more research, right?
Yeah, there's a lot more to come out in the story. I have a really interesting story, though, about backdoor IRAs and why, first of all, I don't think that they will change it. So many years ago, I had a client who worked in the White House for years under several administrations. And so I told him, when I met with him, I was telling him about backdoor IRAs. He said, "Oh, I know all about backdoor IRAs. All the politicians in Washington do it." So they've been doing it for, as long as it's existed. That might be 10 years now. So I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't get into the final legislation, because they probably really like it, and a lot of people don't know about it. So it's like, okay, it's going to hurt me. I'm not going to do it. That's just a guess.
Well, and talk about hidden money. Many of these politicians have lots of it, and so they like these shelters. And so we will really see what happens at the end. Because of the progressives and their influence in Congress, they're going to push as many things as they can. What comes out of as tax sausage in the end will really depend on the centrist Democrats in the Senate eventually,
Look, I think the other thing that makes us have such a dim view of the politicians is that we see them using a lot of these loopholes that unless you're pretty sophisticated, you don't know about. But the reason they know about it is because they're the ones that, either them or more accurately their aides, are the ones writing the legislation. So they understand where all the loopholes are, and they go, "Oh, that sounds really great. I'll use that." It's theoretically available to everybody, but it's really not. I quite like the idea of a progressive consumption tax, as Bill Gates has talked about. One of the things that I think would work reasonably well is the way that they have non-domicile taxation for residents in the UK. Because what happens there is that any asset or money or income that you earn outside of the United Kingdom and spend out of the United Kingdom is not taxable in the UK unless you bring it into the UK. And for me, I know, I'm going to be paying the top rate, but I'm happy with that. Ireland has a similar scheme. Malta has a similar scheme. That makes sense. And I think that should be available to everybody, not just people who are lucky like me, born in Australia, but born off British, born British as well. I'm the textbook definition of a non-domicile tax resident of the UK. I think that people born in the UK should be able to avail themselves of exactly the same tax structure. And
you raised the consumption tax. I have a friend who's really big on this. He's been pushing it for years, and he's totally convinced me the U.S. loses a lot by not having a consumption tax. And it was proposed, by the way, to have a consumption tax in the last few years. But the Democrats said we want it as an additional tax. And the Republicans said we wanted to replace some of the income tax. But you always get less. It's really simple. Whatever you tax, you get less of. So if you tax consumption, you get less consumption, which is probably good in some ways. But if you tax income, you get less income. So because people move and act in accordance. So, but also it hurts us in terms of our manufacturing base, because when we manufacture and ship something over to another country, they might hit us with a tax. But when somebody in another country ships it to us, nobody's paying tax on that directly. So the U.S. should definitely switch, but it's not.
Well, it'd be complicated to get through, and I think that the guys that were wanting to have what they were calling the fair tax, that they had a really good idea, but I just don't think it practically works. And with the UK, it's a lot easier in that anything coming in, you have to pay the tax on. And I'm sort of playing with the idea. I haven't really formulated it in my mind fully yet, but I'm sort of playing with the idea of allowing people to have two separate accounts. And look, the reality is that half of America doesn't pay taxes on a net basis anyway. So what you can do is you can allow people to choose their system. because the bottom half of America is paying nothing. The top 10% of America is paying, 50% of the taxes or something. So
No. You got that wrong.
Those are the public treasury statistics.
You got that
Kim,
wrong. The whole stat
Kim,
right
on a
there
net
is
basis.
way
Well,
Well,
wrong.
actually, he's right and wrong.
The
Kim.
top 1% does not carry, or top 10% does not carry the tax weight of this country. The middle class do.
Actually,
No,
I
that's
think
simply
The
that's
middle
not right.
class pay more
Let me give you the
because we
statistics,
don't
but you're
know
both right,
and don't
you're both wrong.
have authorization. I wish John were here to utilize the tax benefits that usually the very wealthy top 1% have access to. Top 1% again make these laws, okay? And again,
Wait, Kim,
they're made
Kim,
so
Shaquille's
complicated.
right to a
People are
point.
It's just 1% pay like 40% or something.
no,
Wait, no.
No.
Listen, you're both
No.
right. Let me explain why.
no,
Because- let me explain why.
absolutely
Because
not.
it
The
depends
top
which-
1% is not that stupid in this country, right, Dan?
Yeah,
They're
no,
not
and-
that stupid. They're not going to pay that much.
Listen to Peter. He's got a point. Go ahead, Peter.
I'll give you
Here's my point. No.
I'll give you something that's interesting to me. In North Carolina, the Department of Revenue is allowed to tax whatever they want on interest rate of money that wasn't paid in on time. Currently, right now, they charge around 32 to 40% interest rate. That's kind of like having a credit card and the government saying, okay, they could charge you whatever they want. Okay, to me, at this point where we are, why don't we just say, screw paying taxes, let's just print money anytime the government needs it and let them spend whatever they want when they want. I mean, what does it matter? They're just going to
Here are the numbers.
whatever
The
they
top
need.
10%, the top 10% of America pays 70% of the taxes. The bottom 50% of America pays 3.1% of the taxes. Those are the government figures. They're not figures I've got.
Oh, yeah, that's the government who makes this
Those
up.
are the government figures.
No, it's true.
You think
No.
Democrats are going to publish that? That's the truth. That those
That's
are the
right.
numbers.
Okay, and then
That
the
would
thing is, what
Say
he
the
doesn't
top
want to
1% would
disclose,
not allow that. They
Okay.
won't allow
what he
it.
doesn't want to disclose is the top 10% own 70% of all financial assets.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's not
Okay,
true at all. That's not
Go,
true at all.
go look at it.
The
It's so
the
skewed.
top 10%. The top 10% of the
So
country.
skewed. Come on,
They
Shaquille.
earned
Look at that.
47% of the national income, which is high, but they paid 70% of the taxes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let me make a point. The point is, it depends.
You're looking at
which
income.
taxes-
I'm looking at assets.
Now Nick did it. Okay, so let me make a point. It depends. Shaquille is right to a point because it depends what taxes you look at. So there's income taxes, and the liberals, Democrats, whatever you want to call them, who say, "Oh, that's not true." About don't just look at the income tax. So if you add sales tax and Social Security tax, a larger percentage pay in. But the Social Security tax is really a program which pays you back more than you put in, or arguably at least the same. So, but if you subtract sales tax and you subtract Social Security tax and just look at the income tax, which is a good part of the taxes collected by the federal government, then Shaquille is right. It's very heavily weighted. And that's why, by the way, a consumption tax might be good because everybody would pay a little bit.
Consumption tax. Come on, guys. You need a net worth tax. Okay, because here's what you're totally ignoring is unrealized capital gain. Okay, you're doing everything you can to tax the poor and
how are you
let
going
the rich
to
people
calculate
walk.
some's net
What's
worth?
been going on
How are
for
you gonna value-
decades?
How are you going to value
Reagan.
my business? I own 100 gas stations. What are you going to value them at? What if I own something else which is
You
less less
value
obvious?
things
What
all
if
the time
what
in
if
the
I'm an
federal
artist
estate tax system.
and I own the
Okay.
rights to my own music? How are
Yeah.
you going to value
Okay,
that?
you value things all the time in the federal estate tax system using Form 706. You just do the same valuations. But the valuation, see, it's like this. Jeff Bezos, his net worth increases hundreds of billions of dollars and he doesn't pay any taxes on it. He goes, well, I just had capital appreciation. Everybody
Yeah,
owns real
Nick,
estate, knows
Nick,
that.
Nick,
They
what's the-
make money as
Nick,
their capital
do you think
appreciates.
that
In the meantime,
do you think
you're
that
trying to
Jeff
push it
Bezos-
down on poor people. Make the poor people pay more, rich people less.
Do you think that if Jeff Bezos was to sell all of his shares in Amazon in one hit, just market prices, just bang, sell?
Yeah,
What do you
right.
think would happen? Do you think he would end up with that amount of money back in his pocket?
No, Well, the thing, he would
So-
finally.
so-
Shaquille, he'd finally
So
pay
if
taxes
you
for the
want
first
to
time
tax
in
something,
his
hang on,
life.
Nick. If you want to
Listen.
tax something, what does Jeff Bezos do? He, like all the other billionaires, borrow money against their assets and then spend the money. A progressive, and remember when I said a consumption tax, I said a progressive consumption tax. If what you want to do is have a similar situation as what you've got right now, then what you would do is you would simply exempt everybody under 100,000 or 400,000 or whatever in spending every year, and you'd get to the same situation. What is wrong is that somebody who earns $100 million in income versus somebody who's had a $100 million increase in their asset base, those two people are in the same financial position, but one of them's going to pay almost half of that in taxes, and the other one's going to pay zero. Where's the fairness in that?
Okay, well, let's look at the fairness of this. Here you got these poor working serfs out there. They're listening to this show, or they're not listening to this show because they're too busy working. 15.3% gets taken out automatically, Social Security. Then they got to pay income tax. Then you get people who invest in real estate or businesses. The capital appreciation could be $200,000, and they pay zero in taxes. And you're telling me that's fair? And that goes on every day in this country. That's part of the reason rich people get richer and poor people get richer.
I didn't say it was fair, but the rich are not responsible for the deprivations of the poor.
And if you want to need to study the tax system to figure out how they're getting screwed.
If you want to address the issue, what you do is you try to have a broad tax base and something that treats most people who are in the same economic position fairly and equally. What you don't do is just say progressive rates of income tax hasn't worked. Let's do that some more. Okay, that's what you don't do.
You know, and Warren Buffett knows, and Warren Buffett says this: my secretary pays a higher percentage in taxes than I do. Why? It's because he's pulling out capital gains or unrealized appreciation. No, we don't pay taxes at all. His secretary pays 15.3% off the bat in Social Security, Medicare,
well, half
plus
of that,
state,
anyway.
plus state and federal income tax.
You know, I think
you're telling me that's fair.
I think the rich could pay a little more in taxes, but
a little more. They should pay a lot more.
Tony Robbins,
soak 'em, baby, soak 'em.
Tony Robbins says, "You want to get rich, create value." So you know what? Right. That's the American economic system and capitalism. So how did Bezos get rich? You know, he created Amazon, which is a fabulous company. I mean, I don't agree with everything they do, but he created an amazing company that distributes, you know, things well. Google, you know, all the rich, very few people, except for those who inherited money, and they tend to spend it down anyway. But those who create it, so these people created huge success. So, by the way, did the robber barons, and I didn't like all the rules, but you know, Rockefeller created Standard Oil. It's what we're still using to run our cars. You know, everywhere you look, the richest people created wealth, and I still think they could pay more taxes, and they should close some loopholes. But to go and say, okay, let's tax them 90%, let's take all their assets. You know what? They'll just retire. And then you won't get any value creation.
Look, that's fine. See, this is the problem I had with Don Imus, who's on radio. Don Imus is making $10 million a year on radio. And he goes, oh, but if they tax me more, I retire. Fine, that gives a young guy an opportunity to step up and take his place and make some bloody money.
Yeah, but
what's wrong with retiring?
The reason the young guy is somehow shutting him out.
Get rid of them. You don't need Ronald Reagan. He goes, oh, I'm paying taxes, can make more $1 million. We don't need Ronald Reagan. Let me tell you something, guys. We do not need Ronald Reagan.
I never know if Nick's serious or not.
Let me tell you the reason why we don't need Ronald Reagan. Because he was a poor actor anyway. So he's a poor actor he's a horrible actor. He's making over $1 million a year. And if he quit, then good actors could come in and take his bloody place.
He did quit. He quit acting and became president. He quit acting and became the president of the United States. That's what happened there. And a bloody good president too.
Let's nail Nick a little bit here. So, Nick, you're a socialist. Everybody should be equal.
Why do you want to label me? Okay, see, this is a typical Republican play. You're trying to label me as a socialist. You're trying to label me. I'm looking to make sure that we have a fair and equitable system, which both parties don't.
Your version of fair is work really hard and then have somebody else take it off you. Right. So you can give it to somebody who hasn't worked very hard.
When does this greed end, Shaquille? When does this greed end?
What greed? I'm not taking money off the poor. I don't
know Jeff Bezos taking money off the poor. Nick,
what?
Are you saying Jeff Bezos doesn't deserve his money for creating Amazon?
No, he doesn't deserve that much money for creating Amazon. Absolutely not. That is way skewed. And part of the reason why he doesn't deserve that type of money, Peter, is that he stole a lot of that money by being smart enough to use the tax system to have unrealized capital gains.
No.
Because we're so stupid not to tax him.
Look,
That's
they
the reason
should-
we have
He
to
stole
limit it.
he stole the money by obeying the law. I love it.
He stole the money because we don't have the laws in
So,
place
Nick, then you're
properly.
Nick at the next
Nick,
thing
your
you say.
socialist
Stealing all that money.
utopia, where
What? It's
Jeff
not
Bezos-
utopia, it's equitable distribution.
Listen.
Why do you want
Nick,
him to be your god? Why do you want him to be your feudal lord? Tell
Listen.
me, Peter.
So if in your
Because he figured out
utopia,
how to deliver
Jeff
things
Bezos-
efficiently.
Can I finish? In your utopia, where
Yes, utopia
Jeff
sounds
Bezos has to pay a huge amount after he earns a certain amount of money or assets, Amazon doesn't exist.
Oh boy, my heartstrings are just going to be pulled. I don't know how, Peter, I could have survived in the 1960s
No,
without
no,
Amazon.
neither does
Let me bring
Microsoft.
my violin out.
Wait,
Nick,
wait.
you're a
Amazon
trust fund. Nick, you're a
doesn't
trust fund,
exist.
baby. Let me
Oh,
just
boy.
remind you that the
Oh, boy. I don't
know how I could survive.
always complaining about the cost of living and the cost of goods. And then when places like Walmart or Amazon are able to deliver those goods to them for a cheaper price by, hey, getting stuff manufactured in cheaper countries or whatever, then there's a complaint, oh my God, they're making so much money. What do you want? What do you want? We can shut down Amazon. We can have all artisan places to make your cheese and your milk and your bread and all those sorts of things.
Yeah,
but you know what? You're going to be paying $15 for a loaf of bread. You're
I
going to
don't
be
know
paying
how I
$10
could
for a
survive
gallon of
without
milk.
Amazon. Hey, Shaquille, I don't
Wait,
know how I
it's
could
not just
listen. I can live
Amazon,
without
Nick.
Amazon. I'm sorry, you
Nick,
guys can't.
Now
I can
we're
live
not
without.
with now.
Goodbye,
There's no
Amazon.
wait. There's
Goodbye,
no
Jeff.
Google. There's no
No, Nick.
Microsoft. There's no Walmart because everybody
Oh,
gets a
boy.
certain amount of
My
wealth and they want to
heartstrings.
take it all away from you, and you
My
kill
heartstrings
entrepreneurship.
are just.
And
Oh,
what do you get?
look, I'm a bleeding Republican now. Bleeding heart Republican. Boy, oh, it's so hard. We're going to be. How can we survive without Microsoft and,
You know how we
Bill Gates
survive?
being super rich? I don't know how I can handle
You know
myself.
how we
Oh
survive
dear.
without all of
Oh
that?
dear. I think I'm going to have a
Wait,
stroke
it's
like the
very basic.
Kardashians.
No, Nick,
Just
what
take-
it is, is
everything
that
he
Oh,
owns.
I need my Bill Gates God. Please, Bill.
Center right and Republicans. It's not that they are saying
Bleeding
we've
heart
got to make
Republicans.
sure that we've got Jeff Bezos and we've got Bill Gates. What they're saying is that in order to have the best economic system the world has ever seen, we have to make sure that anybody has the potential and the ability to be able to be the next Bill Gates.
But the
or
best,
next Jeff Bezos.
the best economic system we've
Okay,
seen
and that's why you
during the
see,
Eisenhower
and that's why you
years
see
after
on the
war.
Forbes list in almost every country in the world that has a liberal democracy and a capitalist economic system, you will know that every one of the people that are on the Forbes 100 list are within 3 generations of the people that made the money.
You know, the thing is, what we don't need is a feudal system, which we're moving toward today, where we have our lords. Oh, Lord Bill Gates. Oh, Lord Jeff Bezos. Oh, Lord of the rich. And that we're all serfs to their kingdom.
You can worship
Nick, I
the
think you have
poor.
too much money. So can I come by and have your deed to your condo?
I have a
Because there's
townhouse. And no, and frankly, I'm not Bill Gates. You can't
No,
have
but-
my
You
condo.
know what he takes
Now, if I'm Bill Gates and I have if I'm Bill Gates and I have
Shaquille, let me
200,000 condos,
Nick, I would
then that's
rather
wrong.
study Bill Gates.
I don't know
than
why
to
you guys
worship-
don't get that.
I
Okay,
would rather
You
study
have
Bill
too
Gates
much
than to
money,
worship
so
the
I
poor
think
like
you
you
have
want
to
to
turn
do.
it all over.
Listen,
Because
I don't know why you don't
everybody
get
should-
that. A
you
person
didn't
having
deserve
one
that.
condo is totally different than Bill Gates has 200,000 condos. And
Who's to say?
you think for some reason that
Who
Bill Gates
grants
having
you tenure rights?
200,000 condos
Listen,
is okay. It's
If
not
I go
okay.
to a poor area, you have way too, or a poor country, you have way too much money. You should be sharing everything equally. So you should empty your bank account.
We're not talking about me. We're talking about
Why do
Bill
you
Gates
deserve it?
and the
No,
super
you want to
billionaires.
talk about
Nick,
Bill Gates,
I think that
but
you
somebody
should. I
wants
think
to
you
talk
should
about
just
you.
give
No,
everything
we're talking
up.
about Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and the super billionaires that you guys worship.
Vow
Okay.
of poverty.
And the thing is, you
Well,
tell
you sit
me
there and
why it
worship the
makes sense
poor,
that they have
the
200,000
meth using drug addict that's homeless in Skid Row. You want to worship them and take my money and give it to them.
I didn't say that. I'm not a bleeding heart liberal either. Okay. So the thing
Well,
is, I'm not going to jump onto the left bandwagon. But certainly, I'm not a bleeding heart. I'm not a bleeding heart conservative either. So what I'm not going to do is say, oh gosh, we got to make sure we do everything we can to protect Billy Boy and to protect Jeffy Boy to make sure that they have zillion more times money than anybody else.
We're protecting the tenets of freedom and liberty. That's what we're protecting.
The one
No,
thing
you call that freedom and liberty. I call it
one thing
dumb.
I agree with is the corporate oligarchs have gotten too much power in the United States.
Here.
And too much influence. We saw that. We've seen that. It's way out of control. We're back in the Rockefeller, Standard Oil days. Something has to be done, either by breaking them up as monopolies, because they really are, the Googles, the Facebooks, and others. Too much power, too much influence, too much political control. They're manipulating the press. They're manipulating the free exercise of expression. They're doing all these things, and they are. We know it. We can see it. And so that needs to stop. Right. That needs to stop. Now, they're using our tax dollars to do it, so we're subsidizing the theft of democracy in our nation by allowing the oligarchs to continue to abuse their power. They are abusing
right on.
They are abusing their power. So what do we do about that? When they probably pay off.
You want the Napoleon solution or the French Revolutionary War?
Well, back in the day, what they did is they used the antitrust laws to break them up in order to prevent them from being monopolies and influencing their political and economic power disproportionately in our nation. That's what they did back then. They should do the same thing now, because having them do what they're doing is harmful. And the recent whistleblower for Facebook, for example, that guy was speaking out of both sides of his mouth, lied to Congress about, we're doing this in the best interest. And what he was doing is fueling the fights and gaining, because he was economically, he did what was in the best interest for him. He wasn't interested in anybody else but Facebook. And so we see these guys acting inappropriately and not in the best interest of the American people.
Dan,
the corporate oligarchs.
Listen to this guy, Dan. You sounded like a bleeding heart liberal.
Adam,
I don't know how these guys are able to handle it.
Why doesn't Sasha say something?
Wealth and Nations wrote about the responsibility of capitalism. These guys are clearly abusing their privileges. There has to be a balance in capitalism and the social conscience. They call that the public virtue. We've been so disconnected with our public virtue and been raped by the big oligarchs. Something has to be done. That should be the outcry.
We have an oligarch expert here, Sasha Starr. Sasha.
Oh yeah, he knows all about oligarchs.
Yeah, he knows about it.
Just to help you a little bit, Facebook stock is down almost 5% today. and now they're being compared to tobacco companies who knew for generations that their products are addictive and not good for health of people who consume that. Doesn't matter. I owe a couple of tobacco stocks and they're paying fabulous dividends, 7.5%, 8% or so on, but they're still tobacco stock. It doesn't change anything. It's just me because I'm greedy. Actually, I shouldn't do that, and I will sell them provided that they will go up to at least 5 to 10% in the next few months. I will sell them all. I promise you that. Now, guess what? Facebook site is unavailable. I've just lost connection with my Facebook, and I'm trying to log in, and I can't.
And unfortunately, we're unavailable because we're at the hour, and we'll see you next week on Economics Monday.